Hansol No was a young man who used to work part-time at a restaurant. One day, the restaurant manager confronted him, questioning why he wouldn't listen to instructions. The manager, clearly agitated, accused Hansol of acting suspiciously, even suggesting that perhaps the FDA had bribed him to report issues about the restaurant. Holding a plate of food, the manager pointed to it and demanded to know whether it looked eaten. He insisted that the food was as good as new and argued that no one would be able to tell the difference. He emphasized how expensive the dish was and angrily asked Hansol how he could suggest throwing it out. The manager then went on, expressing frustration at having to constantly lecture Hansol, accusing him of being another burden in addition to the restaurant's already declining sales. He remarked bitterly that he had chosen Hansol because he looked decent and normal, but now saw him as completely useless. In response, Hansol told the manager that all he ever did was reuse leftovers, and that he shouldn't be surprised the business was failing. He pointed out the hypocrisy of blaming employees for the inevitable downfall. The manager, now furious, demanded to know what Hansol was talking about. Hansol calmly replied that refusing to serve rejected food wasn't going to revive the business and added sarcastically how petty the manager was for thinking so. He told him that if he was that upset, he might as well fire him, asserting that everything he said had been the truth. Eventually, Hansol was fired. As he walked out of the restaurant, he kept thinking that he hadn't done anything wrong yet. He always ended up in these situations. It was always the same pattern. His temper would flare up, take control of him, and later, he would be left with nothing but regret. He thought to himself that maybe he should have made sure the rent was covered before quitting the job. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he checked his balance and only $150 remained. He realized this was far from enough to cover the month's rent. And with his odd personality, he had no friends or relatives from whom he could borrow money. He concluded that there was only one solution left: contacting the landlord. Dialing her number, he introduced himself as Hansol No and mentioned the issue about the rent. She instructed him to meet her at their usual place. Hansol arrived at the landlord's apartment, and the first thing they did was a late-night yoga session, something they had made into a routine. He often conducted cardio sessions for her. During the session, the landlord reminded him that he had to teach her properly if he wanted to receive his allowance. She warned him that unless he put effort into it, he might end up kicked out into the cold. Although she disliked having to push him before he acted, she acknowledged his dedication to the training and decided to let him off the hook for the rent that month. Still, she questioned why he couldn't even hold down a part-time job. She brought up the recent incident where he got fired for refusing to ignore spoiled food, calling him a goody two-shoes, and asking why it was so hard for him to just stay quiet. She said that if she were in his shoes, she would find it harder to endure being broke and unable to pay rent every month than to look the other way for once. Hansol protested, asking whether he couldn't speak up when something was clearly wrong. The landlord told him that no one was stopping him from making a fuss, but if he was so confident about standing up for what was right, he should have considered the consequences of getting fired. Hansol muttered that restaurants like that deserved to go out of business anyway. She told him that he could only say such things because he had nothing to be responsible for, calling him a child who couldn't even manage his own life. According to her, there was no point in listening to someone who couldn't handle their responsibilities. She told him that a grown adult who couldn't even pay rent had no right to talk about justice or slack off in the name of it. He needed to grow up, take responsibility, and act like an adult if he wanted to be treated like one. She asked him how long he intended to behave like a little boy. Hansol replied with a sigh, complaining that she was nagging him like his mother. She smirked and said that wasn't something she expected to hear from someone who just gave her double workout sessions. She asked if he had just called her his mom, then burst out laughing. Hansol rolled his eyes and told her to forget it, suggesting they do one more round of yoga. When he asked what she meant, she looked at him and ordered him to follow her instructions, noting that she could still see his dumbbells lying around. He explained that he had put them away because he thought they were done for the night. He added that if someone else saw them together, they might assume she was the one paying him. Hansol reflected on how he always felt a certain way around the landlord. Though she rarely showed it, she was truly a mature woman who liked to involve herself in his life. Half joking, he told her that she should use some of her power to properly train him in yoga. He added sarcastically that she was hurting his pride and asked if she really needed to lecture him about getting a job when he was already teaching her sessions. He wondered aloud why she couldn't be kinder to him. Meanwhile, Subin Lee, a girl who lived in the upper portion of the same building owned by the landlord, was busy working in her room on her computer. Frustrated, she muttered angrily about her professor, wishing he would just disappear. She was clearly overwhelmed and on the verge of losing her mind. She couldn't understand how a woman who had worked for years in a graduate school office still didn't know the basics of Excel. Subin resolved that before she graduated, she would confront this woman and make her life difficult. While still fuming, Subin suddenly heard noise coming from above. She sighed in irritation, realizing it was the landlord and that boy, Han Sol, doing their workout again loud as always, even at this late hour. She grumbled that she couldn't take it anymore and decided she had to go and stop them, as they were disturbing her concentration and peace. Subin, visibly irritated, stood up from her desk and headed upstairs to the landlord's apartment. As she climbed the steps, she muttered that she lived downstairs and could clearly hear the noise. She knew they were inside, and complained loudly at their door, saying they were being unreasonably loud. Inside the apartment, Han Sol heard her voice and admitted that maybe they shouldn't have been doing yoga at this hour. The landlord, Hyun Jusung, waved off the concern and told him to ignore the girl, claiming that she always found something to complain about. Han Sol, however, noticed that the doorbell kept ringing persistently and decided to go out and talk to her. He assured Hyun he would be right back after a quick word. But Hyun tried to stop him. She pleaded with him to stay and finish the training session, insisting that he needed to listen to her. Meanwhile, Subin remained standing outside the door. Inside, Han Sol told Hyun again that he would just step out briefly to have a word with her. Hyun, sounding exasperated, questioned why he cared so much when she was the actual owner of the house. Han Sol replied that, despite that, they weren't exactly innocent in the matter either. He stepped outside, apologizing for disturbing the night. He explained that he had just been finishing up some work when he opened the door. But to his surprise, no one was there. Instead, he saw a number of posters plastered all over the walls. The posters were angrily worded and specifically targeted Room 401. They read, "Room 401, you people are monsters. I've told you last month and the month before that and multiple times in between to stop having your health sessions. I don't know if you're ignoring me or just don't care. I'm begging you, please stop. This has been going on for ages. I'm not even asking for forever, just take a break for a day or two. You're disturbing me." Han Sol was stunned as he saw how many posters there were. They were everywhere, plastered on the door, scattered along the walls, and even lining the stairwell. Shocked, he muttered to himself how excessive it all was and began tearing them down. He grumbled that Subin must be crazy to go this far, wondering how far she had gone to post them all. As he was pulling the posters down, Hyun stepped outside and scolded him. She asked why he was taking them down, accusing him of overstepping his boundaries. She reminded him again that the girl downstairs was sensitive and had been acting more irrational than usual lately. Hyun sarcastically asked what he intended to do about it now, labeling him an overstepper. Han Sol, confused, asked what she meant by that. Hyun sighed and began complaining that the situation wasn't fair. She pointed out that they were simply working out in their own home while resolving a rent issue. It was her house, bought with her own money. She questioned whether she was supposed to stop her activities just because someone told her to. Without waiting for a response, she then began stretching and resumed her yoga session right there in the hallway. Han Sol stared at her in disbelief, asking how she could possibly do this outside their room in full view, but she seemed unfazed. She casually explained that she had been thinking about something lately and decided it was time he started managing the villa. She admitted she was growing tired of handling everything herself and figured Han Sol might be suited to the job, since he liked meddling in matters anyway. She offered him a deal: manage the property and receive $4,000 per month, along with continuing to teach her yoga sessions occasionally just like today. Just at that moment, Subin Lee arrived upstairs and spotted the two of them together. Hyun had ordered Han Sol in a firm voice, telling him that if he wanted to live there and get paid, he would have to do at least this much cleaning the entire floor. Without waiting for a response, she walked away, leaving him to handle the mess. Han Sol stood still for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He thought to himself that he had finally done something he never had the courage to do before. Since people were usually around, he had always avoided it, but now he felt he should quietly clean up and head back inside. He moved to switch on the hallway light, muttering in confusion about whether the sensor light had broken since it wasn't turning on. But as the light suddenly flashed on, he was startled to see Subin sitting right in front of him in the dark. His body tensed at the unexpected sight. As soon as he spotted her, he turned and rushed downstairs toward her apartment. Reaching her floor, he called out, asking where she was going. He noticed that all of her posters were scattered around again. Subin had gone back into her apartment, surrounded by the same posters. She sat silently, thinking to herself that she had made direct eye contact with that man. Everything she had done was supposed to catch the landlord's attention and show her just how big of a deal it was to host a jumping session outside like that. She couldn't believe how it had turned into a public spectacle, like advertising their yoga sessions to the entire world. She trembled as she looked at the posters, worriedly wondering what she had done. The next morning, Hansol and Hyan sat at the table having breakfast. During the meal, he cautiously brought up the subject, asking why she had put him in charge. Hyan, with an amused smirk, responded ironically by asking what it was now. Son. Hansol sighed at her tone. He clarified that he didn't have anything against her calling him, that it just made him curious as to why she would assign him such a role. Hyan casually explained that she brought him in because he was good at teaching resistance band sessions. Later, as Hansol stood at the sink washing dishes, he continued to wonder if there was any other reason. Hyan remarked that the place was quite a hassle to maintain and mentioned that all the people living downstairs had a lot of issues. Hansol suspected she was referring to the girl he had seen the night before. He figured Subin had probably seen and heard everything that had happened outside. Then Hyan confirmed his suspicion. She told him that Subin was a strange girl, so strange, in fact, that even the other tenants had started complaining about her. She declared that from now on, Hansol would be responsible for handling her. That included hosting training sessions and helping out a jobless person, which she framed as a perfect example of mutual dependence. Hansol asked just how bad the complaints were. Hyan replied that he had witnessed it himself the previous night, how she reacted the moment something annoyed her. She said Subin had a tendency to get right in people's faces and had long since crossed the line with her hysteria. Before leaving, Hyan added that there was something else but quickly retracted, saying he didn't need to worry about it unless he actually ran into Subin again. Just in case, she advised him to take care of his body properly. Hansol pressed her to tell him what it was, but she brushed it off, assuring him that as long as he did what he was supposed to, there would be no problems. A while later, she walked toward her car. Hansol stood outside and waved her goodbye. She turned back and reminded him that he better not forget what he needed to do. He would get paid, but only if he worked hard and proved he was worth the money. She encouraged him to relax his face, telling him not to make her regret her decision, and that she was counting on him. Hansol replied with a simple okay, and walked back into the building. As he entered, he thought to himself that even if he relaxed his expression, it didn't change the fact that he had completely ignored a noise complaint and had proceeded with the yoga session. He wondered how someone could properly manage such a chaotic situation. Trying to push the thought away, he decided to start by removing all the handwritten posters from the walls. As he headed upstairs, he suddenly noticed that Subin was already there, quietly removing the posters herself. Their eyes met. Hansol hesitated before breaking the silence. He asked her if she was the one who had rung the doorbell the previous night. He acknowledged that they had indeed been quite loud due to certain circumstances and assured her that they would be more careful moving forward. But Subin narrowed her eyes and asked what those circumstances were. Hansol let out an awkward laugh, thinking to himself that her facial expressions revealed everything. He then realized she was already taking the posters down herself and offered to take care of the rest. He told her that if she gave him the ones she had already taken down, he'd throw them out for her. However, her expression grew increasingly cold and angry. She retorted that she didn't need help from someone like him. She pointed out that the posters were meant to convey exactly what she couldn't say out loud, that both he and the landlady had been too loud the night before, and the kind of noise they had made wasn't even something she could describe to others. She declared that she hadn't expected help from someone like him and demanded that he stay quiet. She added, with a cutting tone, That word around the building was he was just some guy getting pocket money in exchange for private training. She questioned what made someone like him act so high and mighty when he was just a man living off a cushy arrangement. Hansel's irritation simmered. He thought to himself that this was exactly why he avoided lowering his guard, because if he apologized first, people would see him as a pushover. He also found it ironic that she, who littered the walls with things she couldn't even say directly, was lecturing him. Then he remembered Hyen's words that you know what you need to do to earn that money, right? Back in the moment, he composed himself and told Subin that he would head up first and that she could continue what she was doing. He advised her that next time, if she had something to say, she should come speak to him in person instead of putting posters all over the walls. He added that starting today, he was officially the building manager. Hansel calmly added that he would also be posting his contact information on the corridor wall later, so that tenants could easily reach him if needed. Subin had been listening quietly until that moment. Suddenly, her face flushed with heat and frustration. With a serious tone and a sharp, "Excuse me," she stepped forward and handed over a bundle of posters to him. She asked him to help her by throwing those away, admitting that she hadn't realized how many there actually were. Her voice softened slightly as she continued, saying that including what she had said earlier and what was written on those posters, it seemed she had been quite impulsive. She insisted she would take the rest down herself and just needed him to dispose of that batch. Hansel nodded and agreed, taking the posters from her hands. Inwardly, he wondered what had suddenly changed in her demeanor. It surprised him that she was leaving that part to him so willingly. Still, she seemed more emotionally sensitive than he had assumed before. He found himself questioning whether all he needed to do was respond gently in return. After a short pause, he looked at her and reminded her again to feel free to contact him in the future if she ever needed assistance. Subin glanced at him, her expression flickering between tension and hesitation. Then, without warning, she blurted out another "excuse me," but this time, her tone was heated and conflicted. She looked him in the eye and asked, almost challengingly, how much she would have to pay if she wanted to have a yoga session with him. Those unexpected words echoed in Hansel's mind, repeating themselves again and again, looping in his thoughts as he stood there silently, trying to process what had just happened. Hansel was caught off guard, wondering to himself what had prompted Subin to suddenly say such a thing. He asked her seriously whether she truly thought he wasn't a yoga trainer. To him, the questions seemed completely absurd. He began questioning if her line of thought stemmed from the incident the previous day, assuming that their talk about yoga and money had somehow led her to form these strange assumptions. Frustrated, he also pointed out how bold she was for asking such things so directly to his face. He began wondering if she was always like this, blurting out whatever was on her mind and simply brushing it off afterward. Feeling too irritated to continue, he decided to pretend he hadn't heard any of it and turned around to walk away. Subin, on the other hand, remained standing there, unmoving. Her mind started spinning with thoughts, asking herself whether she had done something wrong by saying that. She knew he was the man who gave yoga lessons, but now she wasn't sure if she had crossed a line. Later, Hyen noticed something off about Hansel and asked him why he seemed to be in a worse mood than he had been earlier that morning. Hansel admitted that he had seen the girl who lived in Unit 301 that day. Hyen responded with a casual acknowledgement, prompting Hansel to explain further. He admitted that just the idea of having to keep running into her was already giving him a headache. When Hyen asked how the encounter had gone, Hansel explained that it had been a very brief one, so there hadn't been much said between them. Still, Hyen probed further, asking whether it was possible to tell something significant even from a short interaction. Hansel, now slightly confused, asked what she meant. Hyen clarified by asking whether he had figured out if he would want to have a gaming experience with her or not. Hansel scoffed, claiming that no matter what topic came up with her, it always ended in a conversation that left him feeling emotionally burnt out. He asked if such things were even important. Hyen insisted that they were exactly why she had hired him in the first place. In a defensive tone, Hansel responded that he couldn't even begin to consider having a cardio session with someone who said things so bluntly and without any filter. Hyen, amused, pointed out that his issue didn't seem to be with her appearance. Hansel was taken aback, wondering why she was bringing that up. She then smirked and reminded him of all the celebrity photos in his phone's album, filled with sweet, innocent-looking girls with long, straight hair just like Subin. Embarrassed, Hansol asked when she had seen those. Hyan dismissed the question and pressed on, asking what Subin had said that had upset him so much. Hansol hesitated, explaining that if he told her, it would only upset her too. Hyan said that his vague response only made her more curious. She reminded him that making a good impression was important if he wanted to make money. Hansol immediately responded that he had already asked her not to bring that up again. Hyan just stared at him knowingly and commented that he seemed like someone who had a lot on his mind. Hansol fell silent as thoughts swirled within him once again. He recognized that he and Hyan Jusung were people who had met only because of the game they were playing. Their roles as landlord and building manager were merely a front. As someone who couldn't even take responsibility for his own life, he told himself that he should at least be grateful that this relationship, however strange, was still intact. He began remembering Subin's earlier words, the way she had said she wanted to learn how to work out and had asked how much she would have to pay him. Despite angrily telling her not to refer to him as a teacher, Hansol knew that his current situation directly contradicted that sentiment. Those depressing thoughts clung to his mind like a cloud, refusing to go away. Eventually, he opened up to Hyan again, explaining that he had run into Subin while coming upstairs after cleaning the hallway. She had already been taking down the posters, so he thought he might help her out. But something must have triggered her, because she suddenly became rude. He described her as one of those people who always seemed to react aggressively whenever you encountered them. Hyan commented sarcastically that she was probably one of those individuals who lived their lives online, documenting every detail and printing out their personal stories to share with the world. Meanwhile, Subin lay on her bed, staring at her phone. Suddenly, she began mumbling to herself, admitting that everything was her fault. She confessed that Hansol was exactly her type, and because of that, she had gone all hard-eyed and started speaking nonsense talking about cardio and training. She now couldn't understand what had possessed her to say such embarrassing things. The shame overwhelmed her as she thought about the possibility of running into him again. She told herself that she had already moved past the stage of mere embarrassment. The only viable solution, she thought, was to move out. But even that wasn't possible. There was nowhere else to go. Cursing herself as a crazy girl, she stood up, stepped out of her apartment, and began walking upstairs. She tried to prepare herself, thinking that she needed to apologize first. Suffering in silence wasn't going to solve anything. But then came the difficult question, what exactly should she say? Should she apologize for saying something unnecessary? Should she admit that she thought he was a yoga trainer? She realized even that sounded weird. She knew she wanted to express regret, but not in a way that placed all the blame solely on herself. After all, he wasn't completely innocent either. Her frustration grew. She told herself that if it hadn't been for those two making so much noise in the first place, or if it weren't for her current circumstances, none of this would have happened. She wouldn't even need to worry about any of it. Back inside the apartment, Hansol was busy doing a resistance band session with Hyan. He reminded her that they didn't want to trigger the downstairs neighbor again. Hyan replied that it didn't bother her anymore. This was her house, and she could do what she wanted. Hansol countered that he cared because he was now the building manager, or at least he needed to act like one. Hyan teasingly asked if he was now trying to protect his image to earn brownie points from a girl who had already rejected him after their first meeting. Hansol defensively replied that something like that could happen to anyone. Hyan gave him a knowing look and asked why he was staring at her like that, jokingly asking what she was going to do with her son. Hansol laughed and asked if she planned to keep up this mom roleplay. Hyan went along with the joke and said her son should go inside now. Meanwhile, Subin had reached the apartment and was peeking through the slightly open door. She noticed that the landlady was home and that the door wasn't fully shut. She looked inside and thought in disbelief that they were actually doing yoga with the door wide open. She found the idea outrageous. Even though she sometimes lost her temper, she told herself that hearing something like that would only be possible if someone pressed their ear right up to the door. Still, the mere possibility that they might be practicing yoga so openly left her completely stunned. Subin was also thinking to herself that even if the landlady overheard something, it would only happen if she pressed her ear right against the door. As she continued to peek inside, she suddenly heard Hyan mentioning that Subin was pretty, and also something about balloons. Han-sol, clearly confused by the comment, was wondering what that had to do with him. At that very moment, both Han-sol and Hyen noticed Subin standing just outside. Hyen pointed out that Subin could hear them and started laughing, pretending to be surprised, acting as if she hadn't seen her standing there. Hyen kept pretending it was no big deal and added, in a slightly mocking tone, that if Subin had that kind of personality, she should at least be aware of it, because guys usually didn't like that kind of behavior. Subin listened to the entire conversation, her emotions stirring. She was silently fuming, thinking to herself that he had bought her attention, and she was determined to get him to teach her the gaming experience, no matter what it took. Suddenly, the door opened. Han-sol stepped outside, his expression full of confusion as he caught sight of Subin standing there. He looked at her for a moment, puzzled, and asked what Unit 301 was doing there and what had brought her to that spot. Subin started running away from that place toward her apartment. Han-sol stood there for a moment and called out to her, asking her to wait. Subin rushed toward her room, looking extremely flustered and stumbling along the way. Her mind was in chaos, and she kept thinking to herself, questioning what she had just done. As she hurried downstairs, she muttered that she was just going home and needed to get there quickly. While she was running, Han-sol suddenly grabbed her hand, causing her to stop in place. He confronted her, asking why she kept knocking on their door and what she was doing in front of it this time. He wanted to know if she had been peeking. Subin, visibly confused, replied with hesitation, saying it was nothing. Han-sol looked at her, wondering what was going on, urging her to speak up if she had something to say. He noticed how nervous she appeared, trembling without a word. Just then, a voice called from upstairs. Hyen was yelling at Han-sol, telling him to put on proper clothes before going outside or to come back inside immediately. Han-sol responded that he would head up. Then he turned back to Subin and said that whatever it was she had to say, she needed to stop making it so hard for herself to even utter a single word. He told her to stop the strange behavior and to just speak to him directly if she had something to say. He warned that he wouldn't let her off the hook next time if she tried to run away again. With that, he walked off, leaving Subin standing there, lost in thought, thinking that this boy had thick and long hands and that the landlady always seemed to enjoy working out with him. When Han-sol entered the room, Hyen asked him if he had gone outside dressed like that. He explained that he had no other choice since the door had suddenly closed. He hadn't expected anyone to be outside, but somehow the door had opened. Hyen suggested that maybe someone had forgotten to close it properly. She assumed it had been the girl from Unit 301 and asked how it felt to catch the offender in the act. Han-sol replied that calling her an offender was a bit extreme, as it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't said a word even when caught, and it was as if she wasn't even the same person. He wasn't sure, but it was a relief for both of them this time. Still, as the building manager, he admitted to feeling concerned about running into her again. Hyen acknowledged his sense of responsibility but reminded him that the managerial title was somewhat superficial. She hadn't called him there to manage things perfectly. She only wanted to keep him close so she could comfortably enjoy her hobby. She added that she wouldn't stop him if he truly wanted to take the responsibilities seriously, but said the title of nice son suited him better. Didn't he agree? Then, shifting topics, she suggested doing a late-night yoga session and mentioned that they were going out the next day since it was her day off. Meanwhile, Subin lay on her bed, thinking that the landlady had likely left the door open on purpose just to provoke a reaction. On the other side, Hyen was in her room, talking on the phone. She was saying that what the person on the other end was claiming now was completely different from what had been promised before. The promise to respect her decision as long as she was working had been broken. She admitted that it was her fault for believing what had been said and addressed the caller as Dad. She told him not to apologize, that she didn't want to hear it, and that he shouldn't bother making promises anymore. Then she hung up the call while walking with her father. During this time, Han-sol came out of the room and saw her. Hyen greeted him with surprise, saying he was up early since it was already 10 o'clock. She reminded him that they were supposed to head out after lunch. However, she then said that the plan was cancelled, as she wouldn't be back for a few days and asked him to take care of the place while she was gone. When Han-sol asked her the reason, she said it was work. They were pestering her to come, so she had no choice. It was urgent and she asked him to help with her laundry. Han-sol protested, telling her not to toss the clothes inside out like she was shedding skin. Hyun repeated what she had said the day before, reminding him once again that staying there nicely was the most important thing. She instructed him not to stir things up and just to stay quiet. She assured him that she'd be back as soon as her work was done. After packing, she got into the car and drove away. Han-sol stood there, watching her leave, thinking about what she had said. She had told him not to stir things up and to stay quiet, as if he were a child who needed to be disciplined. Maybe he really was a child to that person, which explained why she spoke to him that way so often. His employer was telling him to simply do as he was told, a comfortable and stable job with minimal responsibilities. Having someone like that nearby could be considered a blessing. But at the same time, getting fired the moment he opened his mouth when something upset him at his part-time jobs had become too familiar. Maybe he was just tired of living that way now, because being told not to stir things up and to stay quiet no longer sounded so harmless. He wondered whether he could continue to live like that. As he walked upstairs, he saw Subin standing in the hallway. She addressed him, asking him to listen to her, and remarked what a coincidence it was, saying she had been on her way down. Han-sol responded with a neutral tone. Subin hesitated, visibly nervous, and commented on how strange it was that they had met this way by coincidence. She explained that she had just been on her way to the supermarket nearby. Han-sol, however, told her it looked like she was just trying to brush off what had happened the day before. He insisted that they go over everything that had occurred, one by one. He asked why she had done what she did, why she was still doing it, and what exactly she wanted from him. He reminded her that he had told her he wouldn't let her off the hook next time. Subin stood there trembling and shivering, finally managing to say that if it was okay with him. Then he looked surprised and asked her if it was okay if they talked inside his house. Both of them entered her apartment. As Han-sol stepped inside, he observed his surroundings, thinking that this was what the other rooms looked like. Compared to Unit 401 where he currently stayed, it felt narrower, yet it was still more spacious than the place he used to live in. He found it surprisingly well-managed and tidy. Contrary to the assumptions he had about how internet people lived, it wasn't filthy at all, it was actually quite clean and organized. As he passed by the kitchen, his eyes caught a trash bag placed under the sink. He quietly wondered why it was there. Wasn't it supposed to stay outside? Subin glanced at him as if wanting to say something, prompting him to ask what it was. She softly asked if he wanted to sit. Han-sol declined, saying he was fine standing. But she insisted, mentioning that the conversation they were about to have might be long, so it might be better to sit somewhere more comfortable. He responded somewhat dryly, uncertain about how long it would really take, and added that all she needed to do was apologize for something that wouldn't take much time. Subin, however, said that she had more to say besides just an apology. He asked her what it was, but told her to start with the apology anyway and to promise never to behave so strangely in front of someone else's home again. Despite her irritation, she managed to control her expression and apologized. Han-sol nodded, thinking that it was good she chose to begin with that. He then asked her what she really wanted to say, warning that if it was something trivial like asking how much he charged per yoga session, he would leave. Subin immediately clarified that it wasn't anything like that. She explained that while she did say something inappropriate the last time they met, what she truly wanted to tell him was that she might be into him not in a creepy or obsessive way, but in a rather innocent manner. Then, with some hesitation, she asked what kind of relationship he had with the landlady. Han-sol fell into a flashback from 3 years ago. Back then, Hyun had greeted him, saying he must be the one his sister had spoken about. He remembered how desperate he had been, quitting all his part-time jobs, broke, and desperately searching through real estate agencies to find a decent place to live. Hyun had made a rather blunt remark about how he looked like someone who would end up on the street. Although it was unpleasant, it wasn't entirely false. Han-sol had brushed off how his sister had introduced him and simply asked if there were any available rooms. Hyun told him there were plenty of rooms, but doubted if any would meet his level. When he asked what she meant, pointing out that he had only asked for internet and hot water, she clarified that she wasn't talking about his standards but his situation. No landlord would rent to someone who couldn't guarantee payment. She criticized his bad attitude and added that the rooms he was searching for near the station were typically too nice for someone in his situation. Then she mentioned that it just so happened that a room near the station had become available. Coincidentally, A friend's younger brother had come looking for a room just like it. She admitted that it felt like things had aligned perfectly for Han-sol, but expressed a personal wish that she hoped something would fall into place for herself too. She offered him a deal. If he agreed to help her with one thing, she would overlook his financial problems. Han-sol had asked what kind of help she meant. She didn't explain much, only saying that there would be times when she'd need him to show up right away, and he'd have to be there. When he asked what she expected him to do, she said it was simply to keep her company. There were times things got on her nerves when she was alone. She handed him an agreement and explained that by accepting, he'd get to live in the room right across from the station just by doing that. She asked what he thought of that deal. Back in the present, Han-sol explained to Subin that there wasn't any romantic relationship between him and the landlady. They just lived together. She was more like a boss who was often away, while he took care of the house in her absence. Subin looked away, and when he asked why, she said her neck felt stiff, pretending she had slept wrong. But internally, she was confused. She had assumed Hyan was at least his girlfriend, if not something more. So it surprised her that they weren't even in a relationship. She then commented that it must be because they had known each other for a long time. It explained the closeness. Han-sol replied that he didn't speak in that way with her. Subin responded that maybe yoga didn't require that kind of closeness. He agreed, adding that you didn't necessarily have to be close with someone to do yoga together. Subin reflected on the conversation, feeling puzzled. She wondered if everyone really lived with such strange mindsets, or if she was the only one in her own world. Then she remarked sarcastically that Han-sol must have nothing to worry about, given that he had a room and someone supporting him financially. Han-sol replied curtly that yes. He supposed he was living a blessed life without worries. He asked if that was all, since everything she brought up seemed to have nothing to do with her. If so, he would be leaving. Subin quickly said no. She had one more thing to ask. She questioned herself internally, wondering if he was angry with her. She couldn't understand why things were playing out so differently from the internet stories she had read. Wasn't he supposed to fall for her now that she dressed casually and comfortably? Shouldn't it be easy for someone who looked like her? Finally, she gathered herself and asked him directly since he currently didn't have a girlfriend and mentioned that yoga didn't require closeness. Could he do yoga sessions with her too? Even if they hadn't known each other for long? That was what she really wanted to ask. And to be more specific, she wondered if it was also possible with a new tenant that he, as building manager, had just run into. She quickly added that she didn't mean it in a weird way and was simply curious. Han-sol stared at her for a moment, then told her he understood what she meant and assumed she wanted an answer right away. Subin began to panic internally, wondering how she could prepare herself in such a short time for a one-on-one hit session. During the yoga session, Han-sol commented that she had a nice body and asked if she worked to maintain it. She replied that it wasn't something she did consciously, it was probably just good genetics. Han-sol responded that he would decide whether to believe that after making a few more observations. Subin remarked that he was teaching her so fast, and as they continued the session, she began thinking to herself none of this had been what she planned. Everything was happening so suddenly. During the gaming session, Han-sol looked at Subin and asked whether she was getting nervous. He pointed out that this was what she had been curious about all along, so what was the big deal now? He reminded her that he was only teaching her this session to satisfy her curiosity, so he didn't understand why she seemed so anxious. He told her there was no need to be so tense and reassured her that she was probably feeling more relaxed now, thanks to his guidance. He then added that they were going to proceed with the session, and it was time to clear away the confusion. He glanced at her more seriously and asked whether she was truly curious or simply not interested. He told her to choose one and stick with it, because from the very beginning he had been ready. He questioned why she was now hesitating or trying to back out and said he was still waiting for her answer. Why wasn't she saying anything? Subin replied that she didn't think they would be doing the session so soon. Han-sol raised an eyebrow and asked whether she hadn't known that the gaming session was part of this. Then, with a smirk, he pointed to something peeking out from her pocket and questioned her about it. He asked what it was. Wasn't the session's training or educational tool? Subin looked confused and hesitantly claimed that she didn't know what it could be. Han-sol responded that she didn't have to pretend to be clueless anymore. He asked how she explained the item in her pocket, especially when it was clearly the training tool for the session. He couldn't understand why she was still trying to act so quiet and innocent when they had come this far. He warned her not to suddenly tell him she was feeling embarrassed now. Subin quickly said it wasn't like that. Han-sol, catching the implication, gave a satisfied nod and said that meant she was going to proceed with the session with him after all, right? Han-sol smirked and remarked that Subin had such a great reaction even if she hadn't planned it that way. He still intended to go all the way with the session. He said he was genuinely curious as to where she had learned to be so irresistibly cute. Subin responded earnestly, saying that no one had ever taught her anything. Han-sol looked surprised and asked what she meant. She clarified that no one had ever guided her through a yoga session or anything of the sort before. She wondered aloud if he had assumed she had been acting the entire time. With a shaky voice, she added that it was hard for her even to breathe properly at that moment. Every time he gave her those intense instructions, it felt as though her lungs were being squashed. Han-sol, clearly flustered, muttered that everything about her, including what she had just said, was driving him insane. Subin frowned and asked him what he was even talking about. He replied that she had practically passed out, even though they hadn't done that much exercise, and questioned if they weren't going to continue. He expressed his frustration, saying he wasn't finished with the session yet. Subin, breathing heavily, admitted that she couldn't go on any longer. She claimed she was done, that she felt like she was dying, and that the pain from the intense exercise was still lingering in her body. Han-sol, clearly confused, questioned why she was the one complaining when it was she who had insisted they perform the yoga session in the first place. He pointed out that he had done all the work, yet she was acting as if she were the one who had exhausted herself. She snapped back at him, asking if she wasn't even allowed to complain. Her stomach was aching and cramped, she explained, and it was her first time doing such an exercise. She questioned whether being a trainer in an exercise session was truly something to be proud of. Han-sol stood speechless for a moment, then expressed genuine surprise upon learning that it was Subin's first time doing such physical activity. He said he had assumed she was experienced since she had accepted everything so naturally. Subin, growing more frustrated, told him that he had to stop, especially with all the pushing and insistence. It was all too much. She was simply too tired. Han-sol quickly defended himself, insisting that he had never forced her to do anything. Then, suddenly, his eyes landed on something else entirely. He turned toward the kitchen area and noticed a heap of trash bags. Walking over, he began counting them, more than 10 in total, all shoved under the sink. He turned back to Subin and asked if she never cleaned the trash. Subin looked startled and on the defensive. She explained that she was incredibly busy with work. Even though she worked from home, her schedule was so overwhelming that it consumed all of her time. She reminded him that while he was the building manager, she was still the tenant renting the apartment, and she didn't think it was his place to interfere in her personal matters. Han-sol raised an eyebrow and remarked sarcastically that the mold on the pipes had started to resemble modern art. He warned her that if she wanted to get sick from contaminated water, then it was indeed perfect. Narrowing his gaze, he asked her to repeat what she had just said. Claiming he hadn't heard it properly the first time, he confirmed that she had said it wasn't his place to interfere. Without saying another word, Han-sol began putting on gloves and declared that he would clean up all her trash. He added that today, he was officially giving her a lesson in living tips. He explained that mold could travel through light fixtures and walls, spreading to other rooms, houses, and corridors. He scolded her for being so consumed with work that she hadn't even thought to clean the place once. He wondered aloud how much worse it would have gotten by tomorrow if he hadn't discovered it today. Subin looked utterly humiliated and avoided eye contact. Han-sol continued, saying he had encountered his fair share of people who didn't clean, but she really surpassed all of them. He asked if she cleaned regularly or simply happened to be present whenever the trash piled up. Either way, he said, she had clearly delayed cleaning far too long. He announced that they were going downstairs to throw it all out immediately and ordered her to follow him. He started carrying the trash bags and walked down the stairs without waiting for her response. Subin followed behind, her tone confused and almost pleading. She asked why he was cleaning her apartment when she was the one living there. Han-sol reminded her calmly that, apart from being a training coach in her eyes, he was also the building manager. He said he'd take her letting him clean as her acknowledgement of his actual role in the building. He asked if that worked for her. Subin hesitated, then muttered, "Okay," accepting his terms, and they both began walking toward the entrance. Just as they reached the front door, the doorbell rang. Hansol turned to her and asked if she was expecting someone at that hour. Subin shook her head and replied that she wasn't. Hansol told her that they had to go outside anyway, so she should just open the door. Subin approached the door cautiously and asked who was there. The voice on the other side turned out to be Sasha, who announced loudly that she was now wide awake and didn't know what to do. Sasha explained that she had to head to her part-time job and was busy today, so sleeping wasn't an option anymore. She scolded Subin, asking why she had made so much noise when she had been asked to stay quiet during the day. Subin replied defensively that it was normal to be loud during the daytime. Hansol, watching the exchange unfold, grew increasingly curious. He looked at the woman standing outside and thought to himself that she must be a foreigner. There was something unique about her that immediately caught his attention. Sasha's gaze then shifted directly to Hansol. There was a brief moment of intense eye contact between the two of them. She then suddenly asked Subin if he was her ex-husband. Subin's face turned red, and she exclaimed in disbelief, asking Sasha what nonsense she was talking about. Even Hansol looked irritated by the sudden accusation. Sasha shrugged casually and said she had assumed as much because it sounded like the two of them had just been doing yoga together. Then she turned to Hansol with a gleam in her eyes, complimented his looks, and confirmed with Subin again whether he was really not her ex-husband. Without waiting for a response, Sasha then turned back to Hansol and, with a playful tone, asked whether he would like to do the exercise with her instead and cheekily asked if he wanted to become her husband. Subin, horrified by her friend's behavior, screamed Sasha's name and demanded to know what on earth she was saying. Meanwhile, Hansol, completely thrown off, was left wondering what was wrong with Sasha. Why was she saying such outrageous things? And more bafflingly, why was she asking him to be her husband? Hansol was standing there, holding all the trash bags, and looking directly at Sasha. He asked her what all of it was and who she was, questioning what she was doing there. Sasha responded casually, mentioning that she lived in Unit 302. Subin, startled by the sudden claim, began to interject, but before she could continue, Hansol interrupted and clarified that there seemed to be a misunderstanding. He explained to Sasha that he was just the building manager. Sasha appeared genuinely surprised, asking if he really was the building manager and expressing disbelief that the building had one. She then began piecing together what she had heard earlier, wondering aloud if it meant something was happening between the building manager and a new tenant. Hansol calmly denied the assumption, clarifying that there was nothing like that going on. He said the noise she heard was merely from cleaning, and that Subin had asked him for help, as there had been quite a bit to deal with. Sasha found that impressive and expressed how great it was that even the building manager helped with things like that. She then asked if she could request the same favor in the future. Hansol agreed politely, saying she could ask for help anytime. Internally, however, he found himself confused, thinking that he had never truly been a building manager and didn't know if tasks like these were normally expected. Sasha seemed pleased and said she would let him know when she needed assistance. She added that she had initially come to complain, but now she was glad she had. She remarked that it had turned into a nice conversation. Turning to Subin, she teased that Subin should have informed her earlier if someone like Hansol was around. She reminded them again that since she usually slept during the day, they should try to avoid intense cleaning at that time. With that, she said her goodbyes and left, closing the door behind her. Subin, relieved, commented that at least they had gotten away with it. Hansol, puzzled by her words, asked what she meant by that and if they truly had gotten away with something. Subin brushed it off and told him to forget it. The two of them then headed downstairs to dispose of the trash. After dumping the last of it, Hansol looked at the bags and remarked that it was finally over. He expressed his amazement at how many trash bags had been in Subin's apartment. Subin told him to stop talking about it, saying that it was all cleaned up now and everything was fine. Hansol agreed and took off his gloves, handing them to Subin while instructing her to hang them up somewhere to dry. He commented that he now finally knew her name and asked if he should call her Subin from now on. Subin, still a bit annoyed, told him to do whatever he pleased and then asked for his name. Hansol introduced himself as Hansol and requested that she stop calling him you from now on and instead use his name. He added that if she ever wanted to ask him for a favor again, like she did today, she was more than welcome to. Subin looked irritated and told him to forget about that, insisting that she would never ask for something like that again. Hansol chuckled and pointed out that she made it sound like he had forced her into doing it. He reminded her that the only reason he did it was because someone had asked him to. He stated confidently that there was no chance of that happening again and then walked off. As he stepped away, he thought to himself that the interaction had actually been somewhat fun. He figured it should be enough to set her straight and was certain that she wouldn't get on his nerves anymore. After getting a proper look at her, he also noted inwardly that, despite her attitude, she was actually a pretty cute girl. Subin returned to her room, still clutching her stomach, which continued to hurt from the earlier yoga session. Meanwhile, Hansol returned to his own apartment. He resumed cleaning and picked up his phone, asking the person on the line if they had arrived safely. He was on a call with Hyan. Hyan replied that she hadn't reached yet. Hansol remarked that it was already late at night and asked what was taking so long. Hyan responded that it wasn't anything serious. She admitted she had been stalling with excuses like traffic being worse than expected or having work to do. She explained that, as he already knew, she didn't really like going home. Hansol replied that he understood, noting that she was worse than he was in that regard. Hyan laughed and admitted that being compared to him was making her realize just how messed up she really was. Changing the subject, Hansol told her that he had something to ask. He wanted to know if the building manager's role only included managing the building itself. Hyan asked him to clarify what he meant. He explained that he was curious about how to deal with new tenants, as it was clear one of them wasn't exactly normal. Hyan explained that landlords didn't really have much authority over what tenants did. She said that all they could do was ask for rent on time and instruct them not to do anything dangerous inside the house. If they went beyond that, tenants might throw a fit and accuse them of invading their privacy. Hansol wondered to himself if that meant what he had done earlier couldn't really be considered part of his responsibilities as a building manager. Hyan reassured him again that the role was just a label she had given him for convenience. She reminded him that there were no actual responsibilities required of him. She said she had given him that title to make things easier, especially since he hadn't been able to settle down anywhere else. She told him not to overthink it and to just relax. That was all he needed to know. She added that she still had a long journey ahead and would call him back later because she was bored. Hansol teased her, saying it was because she was deliberately taking the long route. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. Hansol told her to wait a second, as someone was at the door. He walked over and asked who it was. Standing there was Subin. Hansol asked what had brought her to his place. Subin admitted that what she was about to say might sound weird, especially considering the way they had parted earlier, but she had something she needed to tell him. She asked if she could come inside. Unbeknownst to either of them, a surveillance camera had been installed inside Hansel's room. From the other end of the phone, Hyan was able to see everything happening in real time, watching silently as the scene continued to unfold inside his apartment. Subin sat on the edge of her bed, the dim light of her room casting long shadows against the wall. Her mind replayed everything that had happened earlier, like a vivid montage. She clasped her knees and buried her face for a moment, then looked up again with a small, triumphant grin. She had finally gone through with a full training session with Hansol, a guy with a solid, well-toned body and a surprisingly decent face. He wasn't just anyone either. He was the one living with the landlady, the very same woman who had been looking down on her since day one. In her mind, it felt like a small victory, a silent payback, as if she had gotten the upper hand for once. She thought to herself that Hyan had underestimated her, and now she had taken a taste of what hers was. Subin chuckled quietly, letting the satisfaction wash over her. She thought that Hansol really was something. The session had been far more intense than she expected, more challenging, more exhausting. She had seen people casually doing yoga or playing a game on TV or in online videos, and she used to wonder how difficult it could possibly be. Now she knows. Her muscles still ached slightly from the jumping training, but it was oddly satisfying. And yet, a strange question surfaced in her mind. Would he do it again if I asked? The thought lingered, tempting her curiosity. But almost immediately, she scolded herself. Not that I want to, of course. It's not like I'm addicted to it or something. It's not like I'm obsessed. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. She remembered how he had casually said she could let him know if she ever wanted to work out again. It should have been easy to ask. But how could she? What if he thought she was desperate or clingy? Her thoughts wandered further. She told herself that even if she ever brought it up, she would probably beat around the bush first. There was no way she could just come out and say it, not with her pride on the line. Meanwhile, Han-sol looked at her with a raised eyebrow and asked if she had come over simply because she had no clothes and needed to borrow some. Subin, a little embarrassed, confirmed that yes. Her clothes had somehow gotten mixed up in the mountain of trash bags they had thrown out earlier. She suspected the one bag that contained just her clothes was among them. Han-sol shook his head in disbelief. He asked, almost sarcastically, who even stored their clothes like that in the first place. Subin didn't back down. She replied that while it might sound strange, didn't he think she was the kind of person capable of doing something that chaotic? Han-sol sighed and reminded her that it had only been a few hours since he had told her to be upfront if she ever wanted another yoga class. Subin quickly jumped in to clarify, saying that wasn't what she had meant at all, and that he was completely misunderstanding the situation. He shrugged and told her that if that was the case, then fine, but he could read her expression easily. He pointed out that she was wearing a nearly see-through white shirt, making it look like she had rushed up here with a specific goal in mind. Her body language, her tone, everything seemed to scream that she wanted another session. Why else would she come up dressed like that? Subin clenched her fists. She was getting annoyed now. She firmly stated that her clothes were gone, and she didn't have anything else to wear. That was the only reason she had shown up like this. She reminded him that he was the one living with the landlady, which made him the only one she could go to. She asked if he really thought she was that kind of girl. Then she narrowed her eyes and said he was the one sounding desperate right now. Not her. Han-sol crossed his arms and gave her a long look. He told her to cut the lectures and just be honest. Then he sighed, turning toward his closet. He told her he had a few clothes she could borrow, nothing fancy, but they would do. He handed them to her, telling her to take them and leave right after. He was in the middle of cleaning and didn't have time for drama. Subin hesitated. She glanced down at the clothes in her hands, then looked up again. Her voice softened just a little as she asked him hypothetically if she had wanted another yoga session. Would he really have agreed to go along with it? Han-sol paused, then turned to look at her, a hint of amusement on his face. He told her frankly that, since she was kind of cute, of course he would have gone along with it. And then, softening his tone just slightly, he added that if she was planning to stay a bit longer, she might as well have something to eat before leaving. There was no point being stubborn on an empty stomach. Later that evening, Han-sol was in his room doing resistance training. The steady rhythm of his breathing matched the soft thuds of his movements. He paused for a moment, wiped sweat from his forehead, and glanced at his phone. It was late. He wondered aloud if he should just make some ramen. He remembered there were a few bags left in the cupboard. Looking across the room at Subin, he smiled and said she was learning fast. Her form had improved. Her focus was impressive. Then, as he wiped his neck with a towel, he teased her again, asking if she had planned this whole thing from the very start. Maybe this had been her scheme all along. He looked back at his phone and noticed a message pop up. It was from Hyan. The message was short, but filled with quiet emotion. I'm almost home. Can you come down to the first floor and hug me? Han-sol stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. A mix of fatigue and surprise passed over his features. He stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of that request settle in. Outside, the night was silent, but inside, everything seemed to stir with unresolved tension. Subin lay on the bed in Hansel's room, her body heavy with sleepiness. As she struggled to lift herself up, her eyes caught the door, which stood slightly ajar. A wave of confusion swept over her as she tried to piece together what had happened. She found herself wondering when exactly she had fallen asleep in his room. Her last memory was of the yoga session they had started together, right there. She noticed the light in the living room was still on and began to question whether Han-sol had gone out. Though curiosity tugged at her, fatigue weighed heavier. Her stomach hurt, and she felt utterly drained. She reasoned that he probably wouldn't mind if she stayed and rested a little longer. But then another thought struck her. If they continued like this, what exactly would that make them? She found herself pondering their relationship. Was it simply that of yoga partners? Or was this something more? After all, today marked day one of being a couple, at least. That's what it seemed like. Meanwhile, Han Sol had stepped outside, where Hyen was already waiting for him inside her car.